Welcome to the Sleep Story Haven, your peaceful sanctuary where the whispers of ancient forests meet the gentle rhythm of moonlit shores. Here, time slows to the rhythm of your breathing. Worries dissolve like mist, and your mind finds the peace it's been seeking. Each story is crafted to guide you through enchanted landscapes and tranquil moments, designed to quiet your thoughts and prepare your spirit for deep, restorative sleep. So find your most comfortable position, close your eyes, and let tonight's gentle tale carry you to the peaceful dreams that await. Welcome to your sleep story haven. Take a deep breath and let our story begin. The Dreaming Waters, a Celtic sleep story. Chapter 1, The Call of Ancient Paths. The evening mist rolled gently across the emerald hills of County Clare, carrying with it the whispered songs of ancestors long departed. Aisling stood at the edge of her grandmother's cottage garden, breathing in the sweet fragrance of honeysuckle and wild roses that climbed the ancient stone walls. The day's worries had followed her here, clinging to her shoulders like a heavy cloak. But already she could feel them beginning to loosen in the presence of this sacred place. Her grandmother Siobhan had always spoken of the old ways, of paths that led not just through the physical landscape, but through realms where time moved differently, where the soul could find the rest it truly needed. When the world becomes too heavy, most or, her grandmother would say in her lilting voice, remember that there are doorways everywhere for those who know how to look. Tonight, something in Aisling's heart stirred with recognition as she gazed across the rolling countryside, the weight of modern life, the endless rushing, the constant noise, the relentless demands had accumulated like sediment in a river, clouding the clear waters of her spirit. She needed something more than ordinary rest. She needed the kind of deep restoration that her ancestors had found in the sacred groves and hidden valleys of this ancient land. As if responding to her unspoken longing, a path appeared before her that she had never noticed despite countless childhood visits to this place. It wound between two standing stones that seemed to hum with quiet energy, their surfaces worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain. Celtic spirals carved deep into the granite caught the last rays of sunlight, glowing softly in the gathering dusk. The air around the stones shimmered slightly, like heat waves rising from summer pavement, but cool and welcoming rather than harsh. Aisling felt drawn forward, her feet moving of their own accord across the soft grass. Each step seemed to carry her not just forward in space, but backward in time, towards something eternal and unchanging that had always been waiting for her return. The sounds of the modern world, the distant hum of traffic, The electronic beeping of devices faded gradually until all she could hear was the gentle whisper of wind through ancient oaks and the melodic trickle of water over stones. Her breathing deepened automatically, matching the rhythm of this timeless place, and she felt the first loosening of the knots of tension that had bound her spirit. As she passed between the standing stones, a profound sense of homecoming washed over her. This was not a foreign place, but somewhere she had always known, somewhere her soul had visited in dreams and quiet moments of meditation. The very air seemed to welcome her, wrapping around her like a soft woolen shawl woven from starlight and morning mist. The path ahead curved gently to the left, following the natural contours of the land. Ancient hawthorn trees lined the way, their branches heavy with white blossoms that glowed softly in the twilight. The sweet, honey-like fragrance of the flowers filled the air, and Aisling noticed how each breath she took seemed to carry away a little more of her weariness. Somewhere in the distance, barely audible but unmistakably present, came the sound of a harp being played with infinite gentleness. The melody was one she had never heard before, yet it felt as familiar as her own heartbeat. It spoke of journeys beginning, of safe passage, and of the deep peace that awaited those brave enough to leave behind the familiar shores of ordinary existence. As she walked, Aisling became aware that the light around her was changing. It was not simply the natural progression from day to night, but something more subtle and profound. The very quality of illumination seemed different here, softer and more golden, as if filtered through layers of ancient memory and blessing. This light did not come from any single source, but seemed to emanate from the landscape itself, from the stones and trees, from the very earth beneath her feet. The path began to descend gently, winding through a grove of silver birches, whose leaves whispered ancient secrets in the evening breeze. Their pale trunks gleamed like candles in the gathering darkness, and Aisling could see symbols carved into their bark, spirals and triskells, Celtic knots that seemed to shift and dance when she wasn't looking directly at them. Each symbol she passed seemed to resonate within her chest, awakening something that had been sleeping for far too long. These were not mere decorations, but doorways, each one opening a pathway deeper into the realm of rest and restoration she so desperately needed. With each step, she felt herself sinking more deeply into a state of peaceful receptivity, allowing the ancient wisdom of this place to work its gentle magic upon her weary spirit. The air grew warmer as she descended, carrying scents of wild herbs and blooming meadowsweet. Somewhere ahead, the sound of water grew stronger, not the rushing torrent of a mountain stream, but the gentle, musical babbling of a brook finding its unhurried way through mossy stones and overhanging ferns as the path curved around a massive oak tree whose trunk was so wide it would have taken a dozen people holding hands to encircle it. Aisling caught her first glimpse of what lay ahead. Through the trees, she could see the warm glow of firelight dancing against stone walls, and the outline of what appeared to be an ancient roundhouse. Its thatched roof crowned with curling smoke that rose straight up into the still air. The sight filled her with a profound sense of anticipation mixed with deep peace. This was where her journey truly began. She realized, not with the walking of the path, but with whatever welcome awaited her in that circle of warm light ahead. Each step brought her closer, not just to the mysterious dwelling, but to the deeper levels of rest and healing that her soul craved. The harp music grew slightly louder as she approached, joined now by the gentle sound of voices speaking in low, melodious tones. The language was one she didn't recognize with her mind, yet her heart understood every word. They were speaking of journeys and homecomings, of the sacred duty to offer hospitality to weary travelers, and of the ancient knowledge that true rest could only be found by those who had remembered how to trust. As Aisling drew nearer to the glowing circle of the roundhouse, she felt the last of her everyday concerns falling away like leaves in autumn, making room for something new to unfold within her. The threshold ahead was not just a doorway into a building, but a passage into a realm where time moved according to different laws, where healing happened not through effort, but through surrender, and where the deepest truths were whispered on the wind that stirred the sacred groves. She paused for a moment at the edge of the clearing, allowing herself to fully absorb the peace that radiated from this place. The very ground beneath her feet seemed to pulse gently with life, and she could feel the vast network of roots and mycelium that connected every tree and plant in an intricate web of communication and support. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it, not just a place of rest, but a living demonstration of the interconnectedness that her modern life had taught her to forget. The door of the roundhouse stood open, golden light spilling out across the threshold like a river of welcome. Within that warm glow, Aisling could see the silhouettes of figures moving slowly and purposefully, their gestures speaking of ancient rituals of hospitality and care. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the herb-scented air, and stepped forward into the beginning of her true journey home. Chapter 2: The Hearthkeeper's Welcome. The warmth that enveloped Aisling as she crossed the threshold was like stepping into an embrace that had been waiting for her entire lifetime. The interior of the roundhouse glowed with the soft light of a central hearth, where flames danced in colors She had no names for deep blues that shifted to silver, warm golds that melted into rose. The fire cast no harsh shadows, but filled every corner with a gentle radiance that seemed to come from within the very stones of the walls. An elderly woman looked up from where she sat beside the fire, her hands working steadily at some needlework that caught and reflected the firelight like captured starshine. Her hair was the color of moonlight on snow, braided with small silver bells that chimed softly when she moved. Her eyes held the deep blue-green of the deepest ocean pools, and when they met Ashling's, they crinkled with a warmth that immediately dissolved any lingering uncertainty. "Welcome, child of the waking world," the woman said, her voice carrying the musical cadences of the old tongue. "I am Brigid, keeper of this hearth, guardian of the sacred flames that burn in the spaces between what is and what might be. I have been expecting you, though the paths that led you here were yours alone to choose." Aisling felt her shoulders dropping, tension releasing that she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. There was something about Brigid's presence that made it impossible to maintain the hypervigilance that had become her default state in the everyday world. Here, in this sacred space, she could finally allow herself to simply be. "Come," Brigid continued, setting aside her needlework and rising with fluid grace despite her apparent age. "Sit by the fire and let its warmth remind your bones of what they knew before the world taught them to hold so much tension. There is no hurry here, no schedule to keep save that of your own healing." The chair Brigid gestured to was unlike any Aisling had ever seen. Carved from a single piece of what appeared to be silver wood, it was covered with soft cushions that seemed to shape themselves to her body as she settled into them. The moment she sat, she felt a deep sigh escape her lips, not just from her lungs, but from some deeper place, as if her very soul was finally able to exhale. Brigid moved to a large cauldron that hung over a smaller fire at the side of the hearth. The vessel was beautiful beyond description, its bronze surface covered with intricate Celtic knotwork that seemed to tell stories in the dancing firelight. Steam rose from whatever was brewing within, carrying scents of chamomile and lavender, of herbs whose names existed only in the oldest languages, and whose properties included the mending of dreams and the restoration of hope. "This brew has been simmering since the first fires were lit," Brigid explained, as she ladled the fragrant liquid into a cup that appeared to be carved from a single, enormous pearl. "It contains water from the sacred wells, herbs gathered under the full moon by those who remember the old ways, and something more precious still, the distilled essence of peaceful sleep and dreamless rest." The cup was warm in Aisling's hands, and the liquid within glowed with its own soft light. As she raised it to her lips, the aroma alone began to work its gentle magic, loosening knots of tension she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten they were there. The first sip sent waves of warmth and relaxation through her entire being, and she felt herself sinking deeper into the embrace of the magical chair. "Tell me," Bridget said, settling back into her own seat with her needlework, "what burden brought you to our threshold? What weariness of spirit led your feet to find the hidden paths?" The question opened something within Aisling, and she found herself speaking without reservation about the relentless pace of her life, the constant pressure to achieve and acquire, the way she'd gradually lost touch with the simple joy of being alive. As she spoke, Bridget's needles continued their steady rhythm, and Aisling realized that somehow her words were being woven into the fabric taking shape in the older woman's hands. "The threads of every story are sacred," Bridget explained, noticing Aisling's curious gaze. "Your journey, your struggles, your longing for peace, all of these are part of the great tapestry that connects every soul who has ever sought healing in the sacred groves. By speaking your truth here, by the light of the eternal flame, you transform your pain into wisdom that can guide others who will follow the same paths." The fire crackled softly, and in its shifting flames, Aisling began to see images forming. She saw herself as she had been in childhood, running barefoot through summer meadows without a care in the world. She saw the gradual accumulation of responsibilities and worries, the way they had built up layer by layer, until she could barely remember what it felt like to move through the world with lightness and joy. But she also saw something else in the flames, a golden thread that had never been broken, running through all the years of forgetting back to this moment of remembering. It was the part of her that had always known there was another way to live, another way to be, the part that had brought her to her grandmother's cottage and led her feet to find the hidden doorway between the standing stones. Every soul carries within it the memory of the first garden, Bridget said softly, her words perfectly complementing the visions in the fire. No matter how far we wander into the wasteland of forgetting, no matter how heavy the burdens we accumulate, that memory remains intact, calling us home to ourselves. Your journey has only just begun, dear one, but already you have accomplished the hardest part. You have remembered how to listen to that calling. The warmth from the sacred brew and the hypnotic rhythm of Bridget's needles were combining to create a profound sense of peace. Aisling felt herself drifting into a state that was neither fully awake nor asleep, but something altogether more restorative. In this liminal space, she could sense the vast network of energy that connected all living things, the same web she had felt beneath her feet in the grove outside. Rest now, Bridget murmured, and her voice seemed to come from very far away. Let the sacred fire burn away all that no longer serves you. Let its light kindle the flame that has always burned within your heart, but has been hidden beneath the ashes of too much striving. When you wake, you will remember not just where you are going, but who you have always been. The last thing Aisling was aware of before drifting into the deepest, most peaceful sleep she had experienced in years was the sound of Brigid humming an ancient lullaby, its melody weaving itself around her like a cocoon of pure love and protection. In her dreams, she found herself walking through an endless garden where every flower sang with its own voice, where every tree offered its shade freely, and where time moved according to the rhythm of breath and heartbeat rather than the relentless ticking of clocks. When she finally stirred, it was to find morning light filtering through windows she didn't remember noticing the night before. The light was soft and golden, carrying with it the sound of birds singing in harmonies that seemed to tell stories of ancient wisdom and eternal peace. Brigid was still in her chair, but now she was working on a different piece, a cloak that shimmered with the colors of dawn. "Good morning, restored one," Brigid said with a smile that held all the warmth of the eternal flame. "Your sleep was deep and healing, I trust. The fire has prepared gifts for your journey, and there are others waiting to meet you. But first, let us break our fast together and speak of the path that calls to your heart this day." Chapter 3: The Druid's Grove of Memory. After sharing a simple but nourishing meal of honey cakes and herbal tea with Brigid, Aisling felt more refreshed than she had in months. The sacred brew and the deeply restorative sleep had done more than merely rest her body. They had awakened something within her that had been dormant for far too long. A sense of connection to the living world that surrounded her. Brigid presented her with the cloak she had been weaving during the early morning hours. It was lighter than air, yet warm as sunlight, woven from threads that seemed to capture and hold the essence of every peaceful moment that had ever existed. When Aisling wrapped it around her shoulders, she felt immediately protected and cherished, as if the love of countless ancestors had been woven into its very fibers. "This will keep you safe on the paths between worlds," Brigid explained, her fingers adjusting the cloak's drape with the care of a mother sending her child into the world. "It is made from the wool of sheep that graze in the eternal meadows, spun by the fingers of those who remember the old ways of making, and blessed by every hearth fire that has ever offered warmth to a weary traveler." The path that led away from Brigid's roundhouse was different from the one that had brought Aisling there. This new way wound upward through a forest of ancient oaks, whose trunks were so massive they seemed to be the pillars holding up the sky itself. Their branches interwove overhead, creating a living cathedral whose green ceiling filtered the morning light into countless dancing patterns that shifted and swayed with each breath of wind. As she walked, Aisling became aware of a profound silence that was not empty, but full, pregnant with the accumulated wisdom of centuries. The very air seemed thick with memory, and she found herself moving more slowly, allowing herself to absorb the deep peace that radiated from these ancient trees. Each step brought a greater sense of walking, not just through a forest, but through living history, through the dreams and prayers of all who had sought wisdom in these sacred groves. The sound of water grew gradually stronger as she climbed, not the babbling of a brook this time, but something deeper and more resonant. It was the sound of a spring bubbling up from the depths of the earth, carrying with it minerals and memories from the planet's very heart. When she finally emerged into a circular clearing, she saw that the sound came from a well at the center of the space, its stone rim worn smooth by countless hands that had drawn water from its depths. Around the well, 7 massive oak trees stood like ancient guardians, their trunks carved with spirals and symbols that seemed to move and shift when viewed from the corner of the eye. Between their roots, smaller springs bubbled up, creating a series of connected pools that reflected the sky so perfectly they seemed like windows into another world entirely. At the edge of the largest pool sat a figure that seemed to be both ancient and timeless. His long white beard flowed like water over his chest, and his eyes held the deep green of the forest depths. He wore robes that appeared to be cut from the fabric of twilight itself, shifting between deep purple and starry black as he moved. When he looked up at Aisling's approach, his face creased into a smile that held all the warmth of summer sunshine filtering through leaves. "Welcome, seeker of the deep waters," he said, his voice carrying the resonance of wind through ancient branches. "I am Cathbad, keeper of the sacred springs, guardian of the memories that flow beneath the world's surface. I have been waiting for you to find your way to this place where time pools like water and wisdom bubbles up from sources deeper than thought." Aisling felt herself drawn to the edge of the pool where Cathbad sat. The water was so clear she could see every grain of sand on the bottom, yet it seemed to hold depths that went on forever. As she gazed into its surface, images began to form, not her own reflection, but glimpses of other times, other seekers who had come to this place with hearts full of longing for truth and peace. "These are the waters of memory," Cathbad explained, his voice taking on the rhythmic cadence of an ancient chant. "They remember everything that has ever been, everything that is, and everything that might yet come to pass. But more than that, they remember the original pattern of peace that exists at the heart of all creation. The template of perfect rest that every soul carries within it, like a seed waiting for the right conditions to bloom. As he spoke, he cupped his hands and drew water from the pool. It glowed with a soft silver light, and when he offered it to Aisling, she could see tiny points of starlight dancing within its depths. "Drink," he said gently, "and remember what you have always known but have forgotten how to access. Let the ancient waters awaken the wisdom that sleeps in your bones." The water tasted like nothing she had ever experienced, not just the clean, mineral taste of pure spring water, but something that seemed to dissolve directly into her cells, carrying with it a profound sense of coming home to herself. As she swallowed, she felt a shift happening within her consciousness, as if veils were being gently lifted from her inner vision. Suddenly, she could see the clearing as it truly was, not just a beautiful grove, but a living mandala of interconnected energy. The 7 trees were not separate entities, but aspects of a single vast consciousness, their roots intertwining deep beneath the earth in patterns that mirrored the spiral carvings on their trunks. The pools between their roots were not just water, but liquid light, each one attuned to a different frequency of healing and restoration. "Now you begin to see with the eyes of the heart," Cathbad said, his own form seeming to shift and expand until he appeared to be made of the same living light as the trees. "This is how your ancestors saw the world, not as a collection of separate objects, but as a single, breathing organism of which they were an integral part. This is the vision that brings peace, the understanding that dissolves the illusion of isolation that causes so much suffering in your modern world." He gestured to the pool beside him, and Aisling saw that its surface had become like a mirror, showing not her physical reflection, but the reflection of her deepest self. In the water, she saw herself as she had been in childhood, radiating the natural joy and wonder that every soul brings into the world. But she also saw herself as she was now, carrying within her all the wisdom gained through years of experience, all the compassion born of struggle and growth. "You are not here to return to who you were," Cathbad continued, reading the questions forming in her mind. "You are here to integrate all aspects of yourself, the wonder of the child, the wisdom of the adult, and the deep peace of the eternal soul that transcends both. This integration is the true meaning of healing, the restoration of wholeness that allows you to move through the world with both groundedness and grace." As they sat by the sacred pools, Cathbad began to share stories of the ancient times when the boundary between the everyday world and the realm of spirit was as thin as morning mist. He spoke of warriors who found their greatest strength not in battle, but in moments of perfect stillness, of queens who ruled through wisdom rather than force, of common people who lived each day as a sacred ceremony. Each story he told seemed to awaken cellular memories within Aisling, reminders of ways of being that her soul had always known were possible. She found herself relaxing more deeply with each tale, as if the stories themselves were a form of medicine designed to heal the disconnection between her conscious mind and her deeper knowing. The light in the grove began to shift as the day progressed, moving from the golden brightness of morning to the softer, more amber tones of afternoon. But the quality of illumination in this sacred space seemed independent of the sun's position, glowing from within the trees and water themselves with a consistency that spoke of eternal presence rather than temporal change. Time moves differently here, Cathbed explained, noticing her observation. Not in the linear fashion of your everyday world, but in spirals and cycles, following the rhythm of breath and heartbeat rather than the relentless march of minutes and hours. This is sacred time, the time of healing and integration, where a moment can contain lifetimes and lifetimes, can pass in the space of a single breath. As the afternoon deepened into evening, Cathbed led Aisling to each of the 7 pools in turn, explaining the unique gift of healing that each one offered. The first was for the release of old pain, its waters carrying away sorrows that had been held too long. The second was for the restoration of joy, bubbling up with the effervescent energy of pure delight. The third was for wisdom, its still surface reflecting truth with perfect clarity. At each pool, Aisling felt different layers of tension and accumulated stress dissolving away. It was not a dramatic process, but gentle and gradual, like watching ice melt in spring sunshine. With each release, she felt lighter, more herself, more connected to the sense of peace and belonging that had been her birthright, but which she had somehow forgotten how to claim. By the time they reached the 7th pool, the one dedicated to integration and wholeness, the sun was setting behind the great trees, casting the grove in the magical light of twilight. This final pool was different from the others. Its water seemed to contain all colors and no color simultaneously, reflecting not just the sky above, but the infinite depths of possibility that lay within every moment. This is where your day's journey ends and your night's wisdom begins, Cathbed said, his voice soft with the reverence of approaching mystery. Rest here by the waters of wholeness and let their depths show you the truth of who you are becoming. Tomorrow's path will reveal itself in its own time, but tonight belongs to integration, to allowing all that you have received to settle into the deep places of your being where it can take root and flourish. Chapter 4: The Warrior's Rest. As twilight deepened around the sacred grove, Aisling found herself in a state of profound peace, unlike anything she had experienced before. The waters of the 7 pools reflected the first stars appearing in the darkening sky, creating the illusion that she was surrounded by fragments of heaven brought down to earth. Cathbad had withdrawn to one of the great oaks, where she could see him sitting in meditation, his form becoming gradually more translucent as he merged with the living essence of the ancient tree. A new sound began to drift through the grove, the soft, rhythmic sound of footsteps approaching along a path she hadn't noticed before. But these were not ordinary footsteps. They carried within them the cadence of ceremony, of someone walking with complete presence and intentionality. There was no hurry in their rhythm, no tension, only the steady beat of a heart completely at peace with itself and its place in the world. The figure that emerged from between the trees was tall and graceful, moving with the fluid confidence of one who had long ago mastered the art of being fully present in each moment. His hair was silver white, bound back with a simple leather cord, and his eyes held the clear blue of mountain lakes at dawn. He wore clothing that seemed to be cut from the evening itself, deep blues and purples that shifted and flowed as he moved. And at his side hung a sword whose blade caught and held the starlight like captured moonbeams. "Peace be upon you, travelers of the inner pathways," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of one accustomed to command, but tempered by deep compassion. "I am Fionn, once leader of the Fianna, now guardian of the warrior's rest. I have come to offer you the gift that can only be given by those who have learned to find perfect stillness at the heart of perfect action." Aisling felt no fear at the sight of the sword, for there was nothing in this warrior's presence that spoke of violence or aggression. Instead, she sensed in him a quality of protection and service, as if his very being was dedicated to creating safe spaces where others could discover their own inner strength and peace. "In the ancient times," Fionn continued, settling beside the central pool with movements that were both economical and graceful, "we understood that the greatest warriors were not those who conquered others, but those who had conquered themselves. True strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the ability to protect, to serve, to stand as a guardian between the forces of chaos and the sanctity of peace." As he spoke, he began to perform a series of movements that were part martial art, part dance, part meditation. Each gesture flowed seamlessly into the next, creating patterns in the air that seemed to weave themselves into the fabric of the evening itself. Watching him, Aisling felt her own body beginning to relax even more deeply, as if his movements were drawing tension from her muscles and replacing it with fluid grace. This is the warrior's meditation, Fionn explained, his voice maintaining its calm cadence even as his body moved through increasingly complex forms. It is the practice of perfect presence, of being completely here in this moment, while remaining open to whatever the next moment might bring. In your world, you have forgotten this art, believing that you must always be preparing for some future challenge, rather than meeting life from a place of centered stillness. The sword in his hand began to sing, not audibly, but in frequencies that resonated directly with the heart. As Fionn moved through his forms, the blade traced patterns of light in the air that lingered for moments after he had passed, creating a mandala of protection around the sacred space. Aisling realized that this was not mere display, but active magic, the creation of a field of safety and peace that could nurture the deepest levels of healing. Every soul carries within it the warrior's spirit, Fionn said, completing a series of movements that seemed to gather all the scattered energies of the grove and focus them into a single point of brilliant calm. But in your time, this spirit has been misunderstood, associated with aggression and conflict, rather than with its true nature as the defender of the sacred, the protector of what is precious and vulnerable. He approached Aisling, and with movements too graceful to seem ceremonial, yet too purposeful to be casual, placed his hands gently on her shoulders. Immediately, she felt a warmth spreading through her entire being, not the heat of fire, but the steady, reassuring warmth of being completely seen and completely accepted. You have carried burdens that were not yours to carry, he said, his voice soft with understanding. You have fought battles that were not yours to fight. You have tried to protect everyone around you while forgetting to protect the sacred flame that burns within your own heart. This is a warrior's wound, the injury that comes from directing your strength outward while leaving your own center undefended. As he spoke, Aisling felt layers of hypervigilance and chronic tension beginning to dissolve. She hadn't realized how much energy she had been expending in a constant state of alertness, always scanning for threats, always preparing for the next challenge or crisis. Under Fionn's gentle touch, these patterns of protection that had once served her, but had now become prisons, began to soften and release. True protection begins with protecting your own peace, Fionn continued, his hands now moving in slow, sweeping gestures that seemed to smooth away knots of tension and worry. When you are centered in your own stillness, when you know your own strength, then you can offer real assistance to others without depleting yourself. This is the warrior's paradox. The strongest among us are often the most gentle, because they have nothing to prove and nothing to defend except what is truly sacred. he guided her to sit beside the central pool, its waters now reflecting not just the stars above, but the patterns of light that his sword work had woven into the air around them. As she gazed into the depths, Aisling saw herself as she might be, not the exhausted, hyper-vigilant person she had become, but the strong, centered woman she had always had the potential to be. "Rest now in the warrior's peace," Fionn said, his own form beginning to settle into a meditation posture beside her. This is not the peace of the weak or the passive, but the peace of those who have faced their own darkness and chosen light, who have felt their own strength and chosen to use it in service of love. Let this peace sink into your bones, into your blood, into the very marrow of your being. Tomorrow you will need it, for the path ahead leads through territories where only the truly peaceful can walk without losing their way. As the night deepened, Fionn began to speak in a low, rhythmic voice about the true nature of strength and courage. His words seemed to bypass her conscious mind and speak directly to her soul, awakening dormant memories of her own inner warrior, not the part of her that fought against life, but the part that stood as guardian to her deepest values and dreams. The stars wheeled slowly overhead, their light reflecting in the sacred pools and creating a sense of being cradled in the very heart of the cosmos. Aisling felt herself drifting into a state that was neither sleep nor waking, but something altogether more restorative, a conscious rest that allowed every cell in her body to remember its original blueprint of perfect health and vibrant peace. In her dreams, she found herself walking through vast landscapes where every challenge she faced was met not with struggle, but with the kind of centered presence that Fionn had demonstrated. She saw herself moving through her daily life with this same quality of grounded peace, responding to difficulties from a place of strength rather than reactivity, offering help to others from an inexhaustible well of inner resources rather than from the shallow reserves of her depleted ego. When she stirred as the first light of dawn began to touch the edges of the sky, she found that Fionn's presence had become part of the grove itself. She could still feel his protective energy woven into the very air, still sense his warrior's peace as a permanent gift that would travel with her wherever her journey might lead. The sword he had carried now rested against one of the great oaks, its blade transparent as crystal, its purpose transformed from a weapon of war to a symbol of the clarity and discrimination that every soul needs to navigate the complexities of existence. Beside it lay a small shield, perfectly round and polished to mirror brightness, on which was inscribed a single word in the ancient script: Sidhe, peace. As the grove began to stir with the gentle activities of dawn, Aisling understood that she was being prepared for something greater than she had initially realized. Each encounter, each gift, each moment of deepening peace was building something within her, not just personal healing, but the capacity to become a source of healing for others, a bearer of the ancient wisdom that the world so desperately needed to remember. Chapter 5: The Sidhe's Moonlit Garden. Dawn brought with it a transformation of the sacred grove that took Ashling's breath away. What had been pools of starlight became fountains of liquid gold, each one singing with its own crystalline note as the morning sun touched their surfaces. The 7 great oaks seemed to shimmer with an inner light, their leaves catching and amplifying the dawn rays, until the entire clearing glowed with the soft radiance of a cathedral made from living light. From her resting place beside the central pool, Aisling could see a new path opening between 2 of the ancient trees, not appearing suddenly, but revealing itself gradually, as if it had always been there waiting for the right moment to be noticed. This path was different from the others she had walked, paved with stones that seemed to be cut from moonlight itself, and bordered by flowers that bloomed in colors she had never seen before, hues that existed somewhere between silver and blue, between rose and gold. As she rose and began to follow this luminous pathway, the very air around her began to change. It became lighter, more effervescent, filled with a quality of joy and wonder that made each breath a celebration. The sound of the world changed too. The ordinary sounds of morning birds and rustling leaves transforming into something that was almost but not quite music, as if the entire landscape were a vast instrument being played by invisible hands. The path led gently downward through a forest that grew more magical with each step. The trees here were unlike any she had seen before, some with bark that gleamed like polished silver, others with leaves that shifted color with each breath of wind, cycling through the entire spectrum of twilight from deep purple to soft rose to golden green. Flowers grew not just from the ground, but seemed to blossom directly from the air itself, their petals falling upward like reverse rain, dissolving into sparkles of light before they could reach the canopy above. The farther she walked, the more Aisling felt the boundaries of ordinary reality continuing to soften. Time seemed to flow like honey here, thick and golden and sweet, allowing her to notice details that would have been invisible in the rushed pace of her everyday world. She saw the way each leaf caught and held the light for just a moment before releasing it, transformed. She heard the conversations between flowers conducted in frequencies just below the threshold of normal hearing. She felt the gentle pulse of life that flowed through every root and branch, every grain of soil, every drop of dew. After what might have been hours, or might have been moments, the path opened into a garden that defied every expectation her mind tried to form. It was vast yet intimate, formal yet wild, ancient yet eternally renewed. Crystalline streams wound between beds of flowers that bloomed in impossible profusion, their fragrances blending and dancing in the air like visible music. At the garden's heart stood a pavilion of woven moonbeams, its walls gossamer thin, yet providing perfect shelter from any disturbance that might disturb the profound peace that reigned here. Within the pavilion, 3 figures waited for her arrival, their forms shifting subtly between human and something altogether more luminous. They wore gowns that seemed to be cut from the fabric of dreams themselves, flowing and changing like water, like wind, like the northern lights made tangible. Their hair moved as if underwater, floating around their faces in slow, hypnotic patterns, and their eyes held depths that seemed to contain entire galaxies of starlight. "Welcome, dear one, to the garden of the She," the center figure spoke, her voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies Aisling felt rather than heard. "I am Ain, guardian of the threshold between worlds, keeper of the sacred joy that flows between all living things. My sisters and I have been preparing this sanctuary for your arrival since the first star learned to sing." The figure to her left stepped forward, her movements creating ripples of silver light in the air around her. "I am Niam of the golden hair, rider of the waves between what is and what might be. I bring the gift of eternal youth, not of the body, which must follow its natural cycles, but of the spirit, which can remain forever young in wonder and delight." The third figure remained where she stood, but seemed somehow to grow closer without moving. "And I am Bridget of the eternal flame, not to be confused with the Hearthkeeper you have already met. For we are sisters across the realms, keepers of different aspects of the same sacred fire. I tend the flame of inspiration, the spark that ignites creativity and transforms the ordinary world into something magical and new." As the 3 she-women spoke, the garden around them seemed to respond to their words, flowers blooming more brightly, streams singing more sweetly, the very air becoming more luminous with each syllable. Aisling found herself drawn deeper into the pavilion, where cushions of cloud and starlight appeared to support her as she settled into a state of perfect receptivity. "You have traveled far in the space of a few days," Ain continued, her words weaving themselves into the tapestry of light and sound that surrounded them. "You have received the gifts of rest and memory, of strength and protection. Now it is time for the gift that can only be given here, in the space between worlds, the remembrance of joy itself, the recovery of the capacity for wonder that is every soul's birthright." Niam approached carrying a cup that seemed to be carved from a single enormous pearl, its surface iridescent and ever-changing. This cup contains the waters of Tur-na-en-Og, the land of eternal youth, she explained, offering it to Aisling with hands that left trails of silver light in the air. But understand, eternal youth is not about the preservation of physical form. It is about maintaining the heart's capacity to be surprised by beauty, to find magic in the mundane, to approach each day as if it were the first day of creation. The liquid in the cup was unlike anything Aisling had ever seen. It moved like quicksilver, but glowed like captured moonlight. And when she raised it to her lips, she could taste not just the mineral sweetness of pure water, but something ineffable. The essence of every moment of joy she had ever experienced, refined and concentrated into a single, perfect draught. As she drank, waves of lightness began to flow through her entire being. Not just the release of tension or the easing of pain, but something far more profound, the lifting away of the heavy patina of cynicism and weariness that had accumulated over years of living in a world that had taught her to expect disappointment, to guard against heartbreak, to approach life with caution rather than celebration. "Feel it," Bridget whispered, her words seeming to come from inside Aisling's own heart. "Feel the return of your original nature, the self you were before the world taught you to dim your light. This is not regression, but recovery, the reclaiming of qualities that were never lost, only buried beneath layers of protection that are no longer needed." As the transformation continued, Aisling became aware of the garden with new eyes. Every flower seemed to pulse with its own inner light. Every stream sang with the voice of joy itself. Every breath of wind carried messages of love and welcome from sources beyond naming. But more than that, she could feel her own responses changing, becoming more immediate, more direct, less filtered through the complex machinery of adult analysis and judgment. The three she-women began to move around her in a slow, spiral dance, their forms blending and separating like figures in a kaleidoscope made of light. As they danced, they sang in harmonies that seemed to reach directly into her cells, awakening dormant patterns of joy and creativity that had been sleeping for far too long. "This is the medicine your world most needs," Ain sang, her voice weaving through the harmonies like a golden thread. Not more knowledge, not more power, not more control, but the remembrance of wonder, the return of the capacity to see the sacred in the ordinary, to find magic in each moment of existence. "Your people have become so focused on achieving and acquiring," Niam added, her silver voice adding new layers to the song, "that they have forgotten the art of simply being, of drinking in the beauty that surrounds them always, of recognizing that they already live in the paradise they spend their lives seeking elsewhere, and so they pass through their days like sleepwalkers. Bridget concluded, her voice carrying the warmth of eternal summer. Missing the miracles that bloom in every moment, the opportunities for joy that present themselves with each breath, each heartbeat, each chance encounter with the infinite mystery of existence. As their song wove itself around and through her, Aisling felt something that had been frozen within her for years beginning to thaw and flow again. It was her capacity for spontaneous delight, for the kind of joy that needs no reason beyond the simple fact of being alive in a world full of beauty and wonder. She felt laughter bubbling up from depths she had forgotten existed, tears of gratitude flowing for gifts she was only now learning to recognize. The pavilion began to spin slowly around her, or perhaps she was spinning within it. The distinction seemed irrelevant in this space, where the usual rules of physics held no sway. As it spun, the boundaries between herself and the garden began to dissolve, and she found herself experiencing the consciousness of the flowers, the streams, the very air itself. She was the butterfly discovering nectar for the first time, the dewdrop catching the morning light, the ancient oak extending its roots deeper into the earth with each passing season. This is what it means to be truly alive. The three voices sang in perfect unison now, not merely to exist, not merely to survive, but to participate fully in the dance of creation, to recognize yourself as both observer and participant in the grand celebration that is existence itself. As the dance reached its crescendo, Aisling felt herself being lifted not physically, but spiritually, rising into a state of consciousness where gratitude and wonder were not emotions she felt, but the very substance of which she was made. In this elevated state, she could see her entire life, past, present, and future, as a single, perfect pattern woven into the larger tapestry of existence. Every struggle and joy serving a purpose in the greater design. When the spinning finally slowed and stopped, she found herself resting in the arms of the three she-women, their forms now solid and warm and completely present. Around them, the garden had become even more beautiful, as if her own transformation had somehow enhanced the vibrancy of everything within it. Rest now in the joy you have reclaimed, Ain whispered, stroking Aisling's hair with fingers that left trails of starlight. Let it integrate into every cell, every thought, every breath. Tomorrow's journey will take you deeper still. But tonight belongs to celebration, to the simple pleasure of being exactly who and where you are. As twilight began to gather in the magical garden, the three she-women settled around Aisling in a circle of protection and love. Their presence was like a lullaby made visible, And as the first stars appeared overhead, she found herself drifting into a sleep so peaceful it felt like being cradled in the very heart of creation itself. Chapter 6: The Sacred Lake of Healing. The morning in the she garden dawned with a quality of light that seemed to have texture and fragrance, as if illumination itself had become a living thing capable of nourishing both body and soul. Aisling woke to find herself surrounded by flowers that had bloomed during the night. Night-blooming jasmine, whose perfume carried the essence of peaceful dreams. Moon flowers, whose pale petals glowed with their own inner radiance. And others, whose names existed only in languages older than memory, but whose presence spoke directly to the heart. The three she women were no longer visible in their physical forms, but their presence remained woven into the very fabric of the garden. Aisling could feel their blessings like gentle hands upon her shoulders, their love like a warm cloak wrapped around her newly awakened sense of wonder. The joy they had helped her reclaim had settled deep into her bones during the night, becoming not just a temporary feeling, but a permanent shift in her way of being in the world. As she rose and prepared to continue her journey, she noticed that her reflection in the crystalline streams had changed. The face looking back at her was still recognizably her own, but it carried now a quality of luminescence that seemed to come from within. Her eyes held depths they hadn't possessed before, depths that reflected not just the light around her, but the light that had always existed within her, now finally free to shine without reservation. A new path revealed itself at the garden's far edge, leading through a grove of silver birches, whose bark seemed to have been inscribed with stories in a script that shifted and changed as she watched. These were the chronicles of healing. She realized somehow the accumulated wisdom of every soul who had ever found their way back from the darkness of suffering into the light of wholeness. The path wound gradually upward through the birch grove, each step taking her higher, not just in elevation, but in some indefinable quality of refinement. The air grew clearer and more radiant with each breath, and she began to hear a sound that was almost below the threshold of audibility. A deep, rhythmic humming that seemed to come from the earth itself, as if the planet were singing itself into ever greater states of harmony and health. As she climbed, the birches gradually gave way to other trees she didn't recognize, their trunks seeming to be made of crystallized light, their leaves shimmering with all the colors of the healing spectrum. These were the trees of restoration. She understood without being told, growing only in places where the veil between worlds had grown thin enough for pure healing energy to flow freely between the realms. The sound of water began to mingle with the earth's deep humming, not the babbling of brooks or the singing of streams, but something altogether more profound. It was the sound of deep water, ancient water, water that had been blessed by countless ceremonies and charged with the accumulated prayers of all who had sought healing throughout the ages. When the path finally crested the hill and revealed what lay beyond, Aisling's breath caught in her throat. Before her stretched a lake so perfectly circular and still that it seemed less like a body of water than a mirror reflecting not just the sky above, but some deeper reality that existed beyond the reach of ordinary perception. The water was crystal clear, yet held such depth that looking into it was like gazing into the infinite blue of the cosmic void itself. At the lake's center, connected to the shore by a bridge that seemed to be woven from solidified moonbeams, stood a small island crowned with a grove of trees, unlike any she had yet encountered. These were clearly ancient beyond measure, their trunks massive beyond belief, their branches reaching toward heaven with a grace that spoke of millennia spent in perfect communion with the divine forces that moved through creation. On the shore closest to where the path emerged stood a figure whose very presence seemed to still the already peaceful waters to an even greater degree of perfect calm. She was tall and graceful, her hair the color of autumn leaves shot through with silver, her robes seeming to be cut from the fabric of healing itself, soft greens and gentle blues that shifted and flowed like water, like growing things, like the aurora borealis made tangible. "Welcome, seeker of the deep healing," she said, her voice carrying the resonance of temple bells and mountain streams. "I am Diane Saked, healer of the Tuatha De Danann, guardian of the sacred waters that wash away all suffering and restore the soul to its original wholeness. I have been waiting for you to find your way to this place where miracles are not extraordinary events, but the natural result of remembering what health truly means." As she spoke, she gestured toward the lake, and Aisling saw that its surface was not still after all, but covered with the most subtle of movements, tiny ripples that formed patterns of perfect geometric beauty, mandalas of healing energy that spread outward from some invisible source at the lake's heart and reached the shore in waves of barely perceptible blessing. "This is the lake of renewal," Diane Saked continued, her words creating their own gentle ripples across the water's surface. "Its waters remember the original pattern of perfect health that exists within every living being. They do not heal by fighting disease or forcing change, but by gently reminding each cell, each organ, each system of the body how to return to its natural state of harmony and balance." She led Aisling to the beginning of the moonbeam bridge, its surface solid beneath their feet, yet so transparent that they seemed to be walking on crystallized light itself. As they moved toward the island, Aisling felt waves of healing energy rising from the water below. Not dramatic or overwhelming, but gentle and penetrating, seeping into every part of her being and dissolving patterns of tension and imbalance she hadn't even realized she'd been carrying. Healing, Diane Sakt explained as they walked, is not about fixing what is broken, but about removing the obstacles that prevent the natural flow of life force through every aspect of your being. Your body knows how to heal itself. Your mind knows how to find peace. Your spirit knows how to soar. But these natural capacities can become blocked by accumulated stress, unexpressed emotions, and the simple forgetting of who you really are beneath all the roles and responsibilities you have taken on. The island, when they reached it, proved to be larger than it had appeared from the shore. Its grove of ancient trees, creating a natural cathedral, whose atmosphere was so charged with healing energy that simply breathing felt like receiving a blessing. At the center of the grove, surrounded by 7 wells that bubbled up from deep springs, stood a pool that seemed to be carved from a single enormous sapphire. Its blue depths so clear and pure that looking into them was like gazing into the heart of compassion itself. These are the 7 wells of restoration, Diane Sakt said, her voice taking on the reverent tones of one speaking of the most sacred mysteries. Each one addresses a different aspect of the human experience that can fall out of balance. Together, they work to restore the perfect harmony that is your natural birthright. She led Aisling to the first well, whose waters bubbled up in gentle enthusiasm, their song bright and clear like laughter made audible. This is the well of physical vitality, she explained. Its waters remember the body's original blueprint of perfect health and gently encourage every cell to return to that pattern of optimal function. As Aisling cupped the sparkling water in her hands and brought it to her lips, she felt a tingling sensation spreading throughout her physical form. Not uncomfortable, but deeply revitalizing, as if every muscle fiber, every nerve ending, every blood vessel were being gently reminded of what it felt like to function in perfect harmony with every other part of her body. They moved to the second well, whose waters held a quality of stillness that was itself deeply healing. The well of mental clarity, Diane Sakt announced, for the mind that has become clouded with worry, confusion, or the constant chatter of modern life. The water from this well tasted like crystallized silence, and as Aisling drank, she felt her thoughts settling into patterns of greater coherence and peace. The endless mental loops and anxious projections that had become her norm dissolving into a clarity she hadn't experienced since childhood. The third well's waters moved in slow, hypnotic spirals, their depths holding colors that seemed to shift with each heartbeat. The well of emotional balance, the healer said softly, for hearts that have been wounded, emotions that have become frozen or overwhelming, feelings that have lost their natural flow. This water carried the taste of spring rain and ocean depths, and as it entered her system, Aisling felt long-held tensions in her chest beginning to release. Old griefs and fears flowing away like ice melting in warm sunshine. At the fourth well, whose waters seemed to hold tiny stars in their depths, Diane's sacred paused for a longer moment. The well of spiritual connection, she said, her voice hushed with reverence for souls that have forgotten their divine nature, spirits that have lost their sense of connection to the greater web of existence. The water from this well didn't just taste of anything specific, but seemed to carry the essence of connection itself. And as Aisling drank, she felt the boundaries between herself and the world around her becoming more permeable, more alive with the constant flow of love and energy that connected all things. The fifth well bubbled with waters that seemed to dance and play, their movement joyful and spontaneous. The well of creative expression, Diane's sacred explained with a smile that lit up her entire face. For the parts of us that have forgotten how to play, how to create, how to express the unique beauty that each soul brings to the world. This water tasted like possibility itself, and as she drank, Aisling felt dormant creative energies awakening throughout her being, reminders of dreams and visions she had set aside in the name of practicality. The sixth well's waters were perhaps the most extraordinary of all, for they seemed to flow not just through space, but through time itself, carrying within them the wisdom of ages past and the promise of futures yet to unfold. The well of wisdom, Diane sacred said, her voice carrying the weight of centuries, for minds that seek understanding, hearts that long for meaning, souls that hunger for truth. The water from this well carried no specific taste, but seemed to expand her awareness in all directions, allowing her to sense the vast intelligence that moved through all of creation, the consciousness of which her own awareness was simply a single, precious drop. Finally, they approached the seventh well, whose waters were so clear and still they seemed not to be there at all, visible only by the way they caught, and reflected the light filtering down through the ancient trees. The well of integration, Diane sacred whispered, as if speaking too loudly might disturb the profound peace that emanated from this final source, for bringing together all aspects of healing into a single, unified wholeness. As Aisling knelt and cupped these final waters in her hands, she felt all the various healings she had received flowing together into a single stream of restoration that touched every aspect of her being simultaneously: physical vitality, mental clarity, emotional balance, spiritual connection, creative expression, ancient wisdom. All of these gifts merged into a state of wholeness that was greater than the sum of its parts. When she had drunk from all 7 wells, Diane's Sacred guided her to the central pool with its sapphire depths. "Now," she said gently, "it is time for the final gift, the immersion in the waters of complete renewal. But this gift requires courage, for it asks you to release even your attachment to who you think you are in order to remember who you truly are." The sapphire pool was warm as summer rain and buoyant beyond any natural explanation. As Aisling lowered herself into its depths, she felt herself being supported not just physically, but in every possible way: emotionally, spiritually, energetically. The water seemed to penetrate not just her skin, but her very soul, washing away the accumulated residue of lifetimes of forgetting and struggle. In the profound silence beneath the surface, she experienced a state of being that was prior to all names and forms, prior to all stories and identities. She was not Aisling, the tired modern woman, not Aisling the seeker, not even Aisling the one being healed. She was simply pure awareness, pure love, pure being itself, the eternal essence that had never been wounded and could never be diminished. When she finally surfaced, emerging from the sapphire depths like a being newly born, she found that the quality of light around her had changed once again. Everything glowed with an inner radiance that spoke of the sacred nature of existence itself. And she realized that this radiance was not something she was seeing, but something she was being, the natural luminosity of consciousness freed from the veils of limitation and fear. As the day progressed into evening on the healing island, Diane's Sacred prepared a simple meal from fruits and grains that seemed to carry within them the essence of perfect nourishment. As they ate together in the sacred grove, the healer spoke of the nature of true wellness, of the interconnection between personal healing and the healing of the world, of the responsibility that comes with remembering one's own wholeness. "You have received great gifts," she said as the stars began to appear through the canopy above. "But gifts are meant to be shared, not hoarded. The healing you have experienced here is not just for you, but through you, for the world that waits beyond these sacred shores. Tomorrow's journey will show you how to carry these gifts back into the world of form, while maintaining the connection to this realm of infinite possibility." Chapter 7: The Bard's Circle of Stories. The dawn that broke over the healing island carried with it a quality of completion, as if some vast cycle had reached its perfect culmination during the night. Aisling woke feeling more thoroughly refreshed than she had ever imagined possible. Not just rested, but renewed at the deepest levels of her being. The waters of the 7 wells seemed to continue their work even as she slept, integrating their gifts into a foundation of wellness so solid and deep that it felt like bedrock beneath every thought and feeling. Diane Saked was waiting for her at the shore with a small boat that seemed to be carved from a single piece of driftwood, but floated with the grace of a swan upon the mirror-still waters. The boat required no paddle or sail, responding instead to intention and desire, carrying them across the sacred lake toward a landing she hadn't noticed the day before. As they glided silently across the crystalline surface, the healer spoke one final time about the nature of true healing. "Remember," she said, her voice carrying across the water like a blessing, "that wellness is not a destination, but a way of traveling. It is not something you achieve once and then maintain through effort, but a quality of presence you can access in any moment by remembering what these waters have taught you about your own essential nature." The landing, when they reached it, proved to be the beginning of yet another path, this one winding through a forest of rowan trees whose bright red berries seemed to pulse with their own inner fire. These were the trees of protection and inspiration. Aisling understood somehow. Guardians of the threshold between the realm of healing and the realm of wisdom. Watchers who ensured that only those ready for the deeper mysteries would be allowed to pass. The path through the rowan grove led steadily upward, climbing toward what appeared to be the summit of a great hill crowned with standing stones. But as she climbed, Aisling realized that this was no ordinary hill, but a massive earthwork, a sacred mound built by ancient hands according to principles that harmonized perfectly with the natural forces of the land. The sound that had been growing stronger with each step was revealed to be music, not the simple strumming of a single harp, but the complex interweaving of many instruments creating harmonies so beautiful they seemed to reshape the very air through which they moved. Flutes and drums, harps and bells, voices raised in melodies that spoke of stories older than written history and futures yet to unfold. At the summit of the sacred mound, within a circle of 12 standing stones, each taller than 3 people, she found a gathering unlike any she had ever encountered, around a fire that burned with flames of every color, but cast no smoke. Figures sat in perfect circle, each one clearly from a different time and place, but all united in the common purpose of keeping alive the stories that contained the deepest truths of human existence. At the circle's heart, his back straight and his eyes bright with the fire of inspiration, sat a man whose very presence seemed to weave the others together into a single, coherent whole. His hair was dark shot through with silver. His robes seemed to be cut from the fabric of twilight itself. And in his hands, he held a harp whose strings appeared to be made from crystallized sound itself. "Welcome, bearer of the renewed waters," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in frequencies she felt in her bones. "I am Taliesin, chief bard of the Western Isles, keeper of the stories that bind the worlds together, guardian of the songs that remind human hearts of their divine inheritance. Take your place in our circle, for your story too has become part of the great tapestry we weave here between earth and sky." As Aisling settled onto a cushion that appeared exactly where she needed it, she became aware of the others around the fire. There was a woman whose eyes held the depth of ancient forests, another whose face bore the weathered beauty of one who had sailed every sea and climbed every mountain. There was a young man whose smile carried the innocence of eternal youth, and an elder whose presence radiated the wisdom of accumulated lifetimes. "Every soul that has ever sought truth," Taliesin continued, his fingers beginning to pick out a melody on the starlight strings of his harp, "becomes part of the eternal story that is always being told around fires like this one. Tonight, we share the stories that your journey has awakened, the tales that live now in your bones and blood, the wisdom that flows through you from the sacred places you have visited." The music that began to flow from his harp was unlike anything Aisling had ever heard. It seemed to bypass her ears entirely and speak directly to her soul, awakening memories not just of her recent journey, but of experiences that stretched back through generations, through lifetimes, through the vast expanse of time that connected her to every seeker who had ever walked the hidden paths between worlds. As the melody wove itself around the circle, each of the gathered figures began to add their voice to the song, not with words at first, but with pure sound, tones that harmonized with Taliesin's harp, and with each other to create a sonic tapestry of extraordinary beauty and power. Aisling found her own voice joining the chorus without conscious decision, adding her note to the great chord that seemed to resonate through every level of existence. "This is how stories are truly told," Taliesin explained, his words somehow audible beneath the continuing music, not just with the mind speaking to the mind, but with the whole being resonating in harmony with the essential truth that underlies all tales. When we sing the stories this way, they become medicine, they become bridges, they become doorways into the deeper chambers of the heart, where transformation truly happens. The first story that emerged from the musical weaving was Aisling's own The Tale of a Soul, lost in the wasteland of modern forgetting, seeking rest, but finding instead a journey into remembrance. But as Taliesin sang her story, she heard it not as a personal narrative, but as a universal pattern, the archetypal journey that every consciousness must take from separation back to unity, from sleep back to awakening. Every seeker's journey, sang a woman whose voice carried the crystalline purity of mountain streams. Is the same journey told in different costumes, played out in different times and places, but always following the same essential pattern of departure, initiation, and return. The departure from the ordinary world added a man whose voice rumbled like distant thunder. When the soul finally acknowledges that something is missing, that the life being lived is not the life that wants to be lived. The initiation in the sacred realms continued a voice like wind through ancient trees, where the seeker encounters the guardians and teachers who have been waiting eternally to share their gifts with any who are ready to receive them. And the return concluded Taliesin himself, his voice weaving all the others together, not to the same world that was left behind, but to a world transformed by the seeker's own transformation, blessed by the gifts received and the wisdom gained. As the night progressed, other stories began to emerge from the musical tapestry, tales of warriors who found their greatest victories not in battle, but in the moment they learned to lay down their swords and open their hearts. Stories of queens who ruled not through power over others, but through power with others, creating kingdoms where every citizen could flourish according to their own unique gifts and calling. They sang the story of Bridget the smith, who forged not weapons of war, but tools of creation, whose hammer strikes rang with the rhythm of healing, and whose forge fire burned with the flame of inspiration. They sang of Ku Chulainn in his youth, before fame and destiny claimed him, when he was simply a boy who loved the feel of wind in his hair and the sound of his friends' laughter echoing across the training fields. Each story that was sung seemed to awaken corresponding memories within Aisling's own consciousness. Not memories of events she had personally experienced, but cellular memories of the archetypal experiences that every soul carries within it, memories of times when humanity lived in greater harmony with the natural world, when the boundaries between the physical and spiritual realms were as permeable as morning mist. These are not just stories from the past, Taliesin explained during a pause in the singing. They are templates for the future, blueprints for ways of being that your world desperately needs to remember. Every tale we tell here plants seeds in the collective consciousness, seeds that will sprout into new realities as more souls remember who they truly are. As the fire burned lower, but somehow grew brighter, the stories began to turn toward the future, prophetic tales of times to come when the old wisdom would resurface, when the sacred sites would awaken, when communities would form around principles of mutual support and reverence for the earth. These were not passive predictions, but active invitations, visions of possibility that called forth their own manifestation. "The future is not fixed," sang a voice like silver bells chiming in the wind. "It is fluid like water, responsive like clay in the potter's hands. The stories we tell shape the realities we create. The songs we sing tune the frequencies of the world to come." In the deepest hours of the night, when the boundary between sleeping and waking had dissolved entirely, Aisling found herself not just listening to the stories, but living them. She was the warrior laying down her sword, the queen learning to rule through love, the seeker discovering that what she sought had been within her all along. Each tale became a lived experience, each song a transformation, each harmony a homecoming. When dawn finally began to light the eastern sky, the circle of storytellers began to fade like mist before the morning sun. But they didn't disappear entirely. Instead, Aisling realized they were taking up residence within her own consciousness, becoming part of the vast library of wisdom and inspiration she would carry with her wherever her path might lead. Taliesin was the last to fade, his harp continuing to play even as his form became increasingly translucent. "The stories live in you now," he said, his voice seeming to come from within her own heart. "You are both keeper and kept, guardian and guarded, teller and told. Share them wisely, sing them truly, and remember that every word spoken with love and wisdom becomes a prayer that helps heal the world." As the bard's circle dissolved into the morning light, Aisling found herself sitting alone atop the sacred mound, but not alone in any meaningful sense. She carried within her now the accumulated wisdom of all the stories she had heard, all the songs she had sung, all the harmonies she had helped to create. The tales had become part of her cellular structure, woven into her DNA, embedded in her neural pathways, as surely as memories of her own life experiences. The path that led down from the storyteller's mound was different from any she had walked before. It seemed to be made from crystallized music, each step producing soft harmonics that reminded her of the night's revelations. And as she walked, she found herself humming melodies she had never learned, singing fragments of songs that seemed to arise spontaneously from the depths of her being. Chapter 8: The Council of Ancient Oaks. The path of crystallized music led Aisling through a landscape that seemed to shift and breathe with the rhythm of the earth itself. Here, the boundary between forest and meadow, between hill and valley, seemed fluid and changeable, as if the land itself were a living being constantly reshaping itself according to some vast and benevolent intelligence. The very air thrummed with potential, thick with the sense that something momentous was approaching. As she walked, she began to notice that the trees around her were were growing progressively larger and more ancient. What had begun as a mixed forest of birch and rowan gradually gave way to groves of oak trees, so massive they seemed less like individual plants than living pillars supporting the very dome of the sky. Their trunks were wider than houses, their bark furrowed with the deep lines that spoke of centuries upon centuries of patient growth, their branches reaching toward heaven with a majesty that made her feel she was walking through a cathedral built by time itself. The quality of light beneath these ancient giants was unlike anything she had experienced in the other sacred places she had visited. Here, the illumination seemed to come not from above, but from within the trees themselves, as if their very heartwood glowed with accumulated wisdom, and their leaves filtered sunlight through layers of living memory. Each breath she drew carried the deep, rich scent of forest floor, of growing things, of the slow decomposition and renewal that was the forest's eternal cycle. As the path curved around the base of the largest oak she had yet encountered, a tree so enormous that she could walk for several minutes just to circle its trunk, she heard voices ahead, not the musical harmonies of the bard's circle, but something deeper and more primal. The slow, measured cadences of beings who had all the time in the world and used it wisely, who spoke only when words were needed, and then chose each syllable with the care of a master craftsman selecting tools. The clearing that opened before her was perfectly circular, perhaps 100 paces across, surrounded by 7 oak trees that dwarfed even the giants she had been walking among. These ancient beings had clearly been growing here since the dawn of the world, their trunks rising straight and true as temple columns, their canopies so vast and interwoven that they created a living dome that seemed to hold and focus the very essence of peace itself. Within this natural sanctuary, on roots that had grown and shaped themselves into perfect seats over countless centuries, 7 figures sat in council. At first glance, they appeared to be elderly humans of great dignity and presence, but as Aisling drew closer, she began to perceive their true nature. These were the spirits of the ancient oaks themselves, having taken human form for this gathering, their consciousness as vast and patient as the trees they embodied. The central figure, seated on roots that formed a throne of living wood, turned to greet her with eyes that held the deep green-brown of forest depths at twilight. His hair and beard were the silver white of weathered bark, and when he spoke, his voice carried the resonance of wind through mighty branches. "Welcome, daughter of the seeking heart," he said, each word falling into the silence like a stone into still water, creating ripples of meaning that spread far beyond the sound itself. "I am Dur, the Father Oak, eldest of the 7 who have kept counsel here, since the first seeds took root in the earth's young soil. We have watched your journey from afar, seen you gather the gifts that each sacred place has offered, witnessed your transformation from a seeker into a keeper of wisdom. The figure to his right, whose presence radiated the gentle strength of a tree that had weathered countless storms while sheltering countless creatures in its branches, nodded slowly. I am Bile, the sacred tree, the axis around which the worlds turn. I speak for the ancient compact between human consciousness and the green world, the agreement that was made in the first days when your kind and ours learned to walk together in harmony. One by one, the other members of the council introduced themselves, each name carrying weight and significance that seemed to resonate in the very bones of the earth. There was Fidnum, the oak of witnessing, whose branches had sheltered the rituals and ceremonies of countless generations. Galam, the oak of protection, whose presence had turned aside wars and shielded the innocent from harm. Seaskin, the oak of deep knowing, whose roots touched the underground rivers of wisdom that flowed beneath all the sacred sites of the world. Dane, the oak of sovereignty, spoke of leadership that served rather than ruled, of power that flowed up from the earth rather than down from human ambition. And finally, Columcille, the oak of sacred connection, whose very existence was a bridge between the world of form and the realm of pure spirit. You have received many gifts on your journey. Dur continued, his ancient eyes studying Aisling with the patience of one who measured time in centuries rather than moments. Rest from the Hearthkeeper, memory from the Druid, strength from the warrior, joy from the Sidhe, healing from the sacred waters, wisdom from the storyteller's circle. But gifts without grounding are like seeds without soil. They cannot take root and flourish in the world you must return to. Bile leaned forward slightly, his movement causing whispers of response from the great tree behind him. This is why we have called you here, to this place where time moves in the rhythm of growing things, where change is measured not in days or years, but in the slow, patient accumulation of wisdom and strength. We offer you the final gift, the gift of deep roots, of connection to sources of nourishment and stability that will sustain you no matter what storms may come. As he spoke, Aisling became aware of a subtle shift in her perception. The ground beneath her feet, which had seemed solid and ordinary, revealed itself to be alive with an intricate network of roots that connected not just the 7 mighty oaks, but every tree in the vast forest, every plant in the distant meadows, every blade of grass on the farthest hills. This was the wood wide web, the mycorrhizal network through which the forest communicated, shared nutrients, and supported its members through times of stress and scarcity. Feel it, whispered Fidnum, his voice like leaves rustling in a gentle breeze. Feel the connection that has always existed, but which your kind has forgotten how to perceive. You are not separate from the web of life, but part of it, connected to every other living being through channels of support and communication that are always open, always available to those who remember how to access them. As Aisling allowed her awareness to expand into this vast network, she felt a profound shift in her understanding of what it meant to be alive in the world. She was not an isolated individual struggling alone against the challenges of existence, but a node in an infinite web of mutual support. A single note in a cosmic symphony where every voice mattered and every contribution was valued. Galam's deep voice added another layer to the revelation. This connection brings responsibility as well as support. When you understand your place in the great web, you realize that your healing contributes to the healing of the whole, that your peace radiates outward through the network to touch lives you may never know about in your conscious mind. The oak spirits began to move, rising from their root thrones and forming a circle around Aisling. As they did, she felt the ground beneath her feet responding, roots growing up to meet her, not confining but supporting, creating a living cradle that connected her directly to the vast network of forest consciousness. This is the ceremony of grounding, Siskin explained, his voice carrying undertones of vast waters flowing through underground channels. We invite you to become consciously connected to the sources of strength and nourishment that will sustain you when you return to the world of human affairs. These roots will remain with you always, invisible to ordinary perception, but available whenever you need to draw upon the deep wellsprings of earth wisdom. As the roots grew around and through her, passing harmlessly through her physical form to connect with her energy body, Aisling felt a profound sense of coming home to herself. This was what she had been seeking without knowing it. Not just personal healing or individual peace, but conscious participation in the vast web of life that sustained all existence. She was no longer a separate self trying to navigate the world alone, but a beloved child of the earth itself, held and nurtured by forces older and wiser than human civilization. Dane stepped forward and placed his hands on her shoulders, his touch carrying the solid strength of ancient wood and the flexible resilience of living trees. With this grounding comes the authority to speak for the voiceless, to stand as a bridge between the human world and the more than human world that sustains it. You carry now not just your own healing, but the healing potential of the entire web of life. The ceremony continued through the long twilight hours, each of the oak spirits sharing their particular gifts and wisdom. From Dur, she received the gift of patient endurance, the ability to remain centered and strong no matter what challenges arose. From Bile, the understanding of her role as a living bridge between worlds, a translator between different forms of consciousness, Vidnum offered the gift of deep witnessing, the capacity to see beyond surface appearances to the underlying patterns of growth and healing. Galem shared the power of protection, not as defense against attack, but as the creation of safe spaces where transformation could occur. From Seaskin came the ability to access the deep currents of wisdom that flowed beneath the surface of everyday awareness. Dane's gift was the sovereignty of the awakened heart, the right and responsibility to make decisions based on wisdom rather than fear. And from Columnsill, the blessing of sacred connection, the ability to maintain awareness of the spiritual dimensions of existence, even while engaging fully with the practical demands of daily life. As each gift was received, Aisling felt it integrating not just into her consciousness, but into her very cellular structure, becoming as much a part of her as her own heartbeat. These were not temporary empowerments that would fade with time, but permanent alterations in her way of being that would continue to unfold and deepen throughout the rest of her life. When the ceremony was complete, the 7 oak spirits resumed their seats on their root thrones, but the connection Aisling felt to them remained as strong as ever. She understood now that this council existed not just in this sacred grove, but wherever consciousness remembered its connection to the living world, wherever human awareness aligned itself with the patient wisdom of growing things. Rest now among us, Dur invited, his voice carrying the drowsy contentment of a forest settling into peaceful sleep. Let your dreams be filled with the slow, patient dreams of trees, with visions of growth and renewal that unfold according to the rhythm of seasons rather than the frantic pace of human urgency. Tomorrow you will begin the journey back to your world, but tonight you belong fully to ours. As sleep claimed her beneath the vast canopy of the ancient oaks, Aisling felt herself dreaming not just with her own mind, but with the collective consciousness of the entire forest. She dreamed of centuries passing like seasons, of storms weathered and young shoots nurtured, of the patient, generous love that the earth held for all its children. And in those dreams, she felt her own purpose clarifying like sap rising in spring, to carry this love and wisdom back into the human world, to help her own kind remember their place in the great web of existence. Chapter 9, The Return Path. Dawn in the oak grove arrived, not with the sudden brightness of ordinary sunrise, but with the gradual lightening that comes when consciousness slowly emerges from the deepest levels of restorative sleep. Aisling woke to find herself cradled in roots that had grown around her during the night, not binding, but supporting, holding her in the tender embrace of the earth itself. The connection she felt to the vast network of forest consciousness was as real and tangible as her own heartbeat. A permanent alteration in her way of being that would remain with her for the rest of her life. The seven oak spirits were exactly as she had left them, seated in their eternal council. But now she could perceive them in their true form, not separate beings, but aspects of a single vast consciousness that expressed itself through the entire forest. When Dur spoke, she heard his voice not just with her ears, but through the root network that now connected her to every tree in the grove. "The time has come," he said, his words carrying the authority of seasons turning and years passing, "for you to begin the journey back to your world. But understand, this is not a journey away from what you have found, but a journey deeper into it. You carry all the sacred places with you now, and they will transform your ordinary world into something magical wherever you allow their influence to flow." The path that led away from the council grove was unlike any of the paths she had walked before. Instead of leading forward into new territory, it seemed to curve gently back upon itself, following a spiral route that would eventually bring her full circle to where her journey had begun. But this was not a simple retracing of her steps. Each sacred place she had visited was now permanently part of her inner landscape, and she would encounter them again from her transformed perspective. As she walked, she noticed that her relationship to the very act of walking had changed. Her feet fell more softly on the earth, each step a conscious connection with the ground that supported her. She could feel the root network beneath the surface responding to her presence. The trees along the path acknowledging her passage with subtle shifts in their energy. She was no longer a visitor to the natural world, but a conscious participant in its ongoing dance of life and growth. The first place the spiral path brought her to was the bard's circle atop the sacred mound. But now she experienced it from within the network of oak consciousness, rather than as a separate observer. The stories that Taliesin and his companions had shared lived now in her cellular memory, and she found herself humming melodies that seemed to arise spontaneously from the intersection of her human awareness and the plant wisdom she now carried. The stone circle was empty of visible figures, but their presence was still there, woven into the very atoms of the place. As she paused in the center of the circle, she felt the stories she had heard reshaping themselves into new forms, not just tales from the past, but visions of the future she was being called to help create. She saw herself sharing these stories in her own world, not as entertainment, but as medicine, as reminders of ways of being that humanity desperately needed to remember. Continuing along the spiral path, she came next to the healing island in its sacred lake. But now, instead of needing to cross by boat, she found that she could walk directly across the water's surface, her steps creating ripples of light that spread outward in perfect circles. The 7 wells bubbled with the same healing energies. But now, she understood that these springs existed wherever consciousness remembered its capacity for wholeness. Diane's Sacred appeared beside the central sapphire pool, but not as a separate being, rather as an aspect of her own consciousness that had awakened to its healing nature. "You understand now," the healer said, her voice seeming to come from within Aisling's own heart. "That healing is not something that happens to you, but something that happens through you. Every person you encounter who has forgotten their wholeness will meet in you a reminder of their own healing potential." The garden of the Sidhe, when she reached it, revealed itself to be not a place she had visited, but a state of consciousness she had reclaimed. The 3 Sidhe women, Ain, Niam, and Bridget, were aspects of her own restored capacity for joy, wonder, and creative inspiration. The magical flowers and singing streams existed wherever she allowed her perception to remember the sacred nature of existence itself. "Joy is not a feeling you have," Ain's voice whispered from within the garden of her own heart, "but a quality of being you are. When you remember this, every moment becomes a celebration, every breath a blessing, every encounter an opportunity to share the gift of awakened wonder." The grove where she had met Cathbad and drunk from the waters of memory now revealed itself to be a permanent part of her inner landscape. The 7 pools bubbled with the same sacred waters. But now, she understood that memory was not about the past, but about the eternal present moment where all truth existed simultaneously. The Druid's wisdom lived in her bones now, accessible whenever she needed to remember who she truly was beneath all the roles and identities she wore in the world. Fionne's presence in the warrior's grove was no longer external, but integrated into her own relationship with strength and protection. She understood now that true warriorship was not about fighting against anything, but about standing so firmly in one's own center that this stability became a gift of safety and peace to everyone around her. The sword and shield he had carried were symbols of the clarity and discrimination that allowed consciousness to navigate the world without losing touch with its essential nature. When the spiral path brought her back to Bridget's roundhouse, she found the Hearthkeeper waiting with a smile that held all the warmth of the eternal flame. But now Aisling could see that this flame burned not just in the hearth, but in her own heart, that she had become a keeper of the sacred fire that could kindle light and warmth wherever she went. "You understand now," Bridget said, offering her one last cup of the sacred brew. That home is not a place you go to, but a quality of being you carry with you. The rest you sought is not the absence of activity, but the presence of peace that can exist in the heart of any experience. As Aisling drank from the pearl-like cup, she felt all the gifts she had received integrating into a single, unified presence. She was no longer someone who had had healing experiences, but someone who had become a living expression of the healing potential that existed at the heart of existence itself. The final leg of the spiral journey brought her back to the standing stones where her adventure had begun. But now, approaching from the other direction, she saw that these were not just markers of a threshold between worlds, but symbols of the eternal gateway that existed in every moment. The choice that was always available to step from ordinary consciousness into sacred awareness. As she passed between the stones for the second time, Aisling felt the familiar landscape of her grandmother's cottage and garden. But everything was transformed by her new perception. The honeysuckle and roses climbed the walls with the same abundance. But now, she could see the golden threads of connection that linked every flower to every other living thing. The rolling hills stretched away under the same sky, but now they pulsed with the life force that animated all existence. Her grandmother Siobhan was waiting in the garden, but now Aisling could see her not just as the wise elder she had always known, but as a fellow keeper of the ancient ways, one who had long ago made her own journey into the sacred realms and had been patiently holding space for others to find their own path home. "Welcome back, Mostor," Siobhan said, embracing her granddaughter with arms that held the warmth of every hearth fire that had ever burned. "But of course, you were never really gone. You simply remembered where you had always been." As they sat together in the cottage garden, sharing tea made from herbs that grew in both the ordinary world and the realm of infinite possibility, Aisling began to understand the true nature of her journey. She had not traveled to distant places, but into the depths of her own consciousness, had not met supernatural beings, but encountered aspects of her own unlimited nature, had not found healing and wisdom outside herself, but had remembered the wholeness and knowing that had always been her birthright. "This is how it always is," Siobhan explained, her eyes twinkling with the secret knowledge she had carried for so many years. "The sacred places exist both here and there, both within and without. The journey to find them changes us so completely that when we return to where we started, everything looks different because we are seeing with new eyes." As the sun set over the peaceful countryside, painting the sky in the same magical colors Aisling had seen in the flames of Bridget's hearth, she understood that her journey was complete, and yet just beginning. She carried within her now all the gifts she had received, all the wisdom she had gained, all the connections she had forged. But more than that, she had become a bridge between worlds, a living reminder to everyone she met that healing and wholeness, joy and wisdom were not distant goals to be achieved, but present realities to be recognized and embraced. The Celtic twilight gathered around them like a soft cloak, woven from starlight and dreams. And in its embrace, Aisling felt the profound peace that comes from knowing oneself to be exactly where one belongs, exactly who one was meant to be, exactly at home in the vast, loving mystery of existence itself. Chapter 10: The Gift Keeper. The weeks following Aisling's return to ordinary life unfolded with a grace and ease that would have seemed impossible before her journey to the sacred realms. The profound transformation she had undergone was not something that remained locked away in memory, but a living presence that informed every moment of her daily existence. She found herself moving through the world with the same quality of centered peace that Fionn had demonstrated, responding to challenges from the deep well of wisdom that Cathbad had helped her access, approaching each day with the wonder and joy that the she had restored to her consciousness. Her work, which had once felt like a burden that drained her energy and creativity, became an opportunity to practice the arts of healing and connection she had learned in the sacred groves. She discovered that she could carry the presence of Brigid's hearth into any environment, creating spaces of warmth and safety wherever she went. Colleagues who had seemed difficult or demanding revealed themselves to be fellow travelers struggling with their own forgotten wholeness. And she found herself naturally offering the kind of witnessing and support that helped them remember their own capacity for peace. The root network that the oak spirits had helped her access proved to be as real and practical in the everyday world as it had been in the sacred grove. She could feel the web of connection that linked all living beings, could sense when someone needed support before they themselves were aware of their need, could draw upon sources of strength and wisdom that seemed to flow up from the earth itself whenever she faced situations that would once have overwhelmed her. But perhaps the most remarkable change was in her relationship to rest itself. The deep, restorative peace she had sought when her journey began was no longer something she had to schedule or struggle to achieve. It had become her natural state, a quality of being that remained constant regardless of outer circumstances. She could access the healing waters of Diane Sake's wells with a simple shift of attention, could visit the garden of the she by allowing her perception to remember the sacred nature of the present moment. 3 months after her return, on an evening when the autumn light held the same golden quality she remembered from the sacred realms, Aisling made a decision that felt both surprising and inevitable. She would share what she had received, not by trying to convince anyone of the reality of her experiences, but by creating opportunities for others to discover their own pathways to the healing and wholeness that were their birthright. She began simply, offering to lead meditation groups in her grandmother's garden, inviting friends and neighbors to join her in practices that helped them remember their connection to the living world around them. The sessions were unlike any traditional meditation she had previously encountered. They were more like gentle journeys into states of consciousness, where the boundaries between inner and outer, self and world, began to dissolve in the most natural and comfortable way. Word spread quietly through the community about these gatherings, not through advertising or promotion, but through the simple recognition that something precious was being offered. People came who were struggling with stress and anxiety, with illness and grief, with the simple weariness that came from trying to live in a world that had forgotten its own sacred nature. They came seeking relief and found instead remembrance of who they truly were beneath their surface struggles, of their place in the vast web of life that sustained all existence. Each gathering was unique, guided not by predetermined curricula, but by the collective wisdom that emerged when people came together with sincere intention to heal and be healed. Sometimes they would sit in silence, allowing the peace of the garden to work its subtle magic on their overtaxed nervous systems. Other times, Aisling would share stories, not the specific tales she had heard in Talison's circle, but new stories that seemed to arise spontaneously from the intersection of ancient wisdom and contemporary need. She found herself naturally taking on the role that Bridget had modeled for her, creating a space of such safety and acceptance that people could finally let down their guard and allow their authentic selves to emerge. The transformation she witnessed in the participants was profound yet gentle, occurring not through dramatic breakthroughs, but through the gradual recognition of qualities they had always possessed but had forgotten how to access. One evening, as the group sat in the deepening twilight sharing experiences of their week's practice, a woman named Sarah spoke about a moment she had experienced while walking in her neighborhood park. "I was just sitting by the pond," she said, her voice soft with wonder, watching the ducks swim around, and suddenly I felt this incredible sense of belonging, not just to the place, but to everything: the water, the trees, the sky, even the busy street beyond the park. It was like remembering something I'd always known, but had somehow forgotten. Others began to share similar experiences, moments when the ordinary world had revealed its sacred nature, when they had felt themselves held and supported by forces larger and more loving than they had ever imagined. A man named David described how his chronic back pain had mysteriously eased during a walking meditation in the woods behind his house. An elderly woman named Rose spoke of dreams that seemed to carry healing not just for her, but for her entire family lineage. Aisling listened to each story with the deep attention that Cathbad had taught her, recognizing in each one the same pattern of awakening that had characterized her own journey. These people were not just learning relaxation techniques or stress management strategies. They were remembering their true nature, reclaiming their birthright as conscious participants in the ongoing creation of reality itself. As the months passed, the circle of participants grew, but always organically, through personal invitation and word-of-mouth sharing, rather than through any effort to build a following or establish an organization. People came when they were ready, left when their path led them in new directions, returned whenever they needed to reconnect with the source of peace and wisdom they had discovered in the garden gatherings. Some participants began to report experiences that went beyond stress relief into realms that could only be described as mystical. They spoke of encounters with presences that offered guidance and healing, of dreams that provided solutions to long-standing problems, of sudden insights that transformed their understanding of their life's purpose and direction. Aisling recognized in these accounts echoes of her own journey to the sacred realms, and she began to understand that what she was facilitating was not just relaxation, but actual initiation into deeper levels of consciousness. The most remarkable aspect of what was unfolding was how natural and effortless it felt. There was no sense of strain or effort, no need to prove or defend what was happening. The work seemed to do itself, guided by the same intelligence that moved the seasons and grew the flowers, that brought each person exactly what they needed, exactly when they were ready to receive it. 1 year after her first journey to the sacred realms, Aisling received an unexpected visitor. She was working in the garden, tending the herbs that had begun to grow with unusual vigor and potency since her transformation, when she looked up to see a young man standing uncertainly at the garden gate. His face held the same expression of desperate weariness that she remembered seeing in her own mirror before her journey began. "I heard about the meditation group," he said hesitantly. "I know it's not meeting today, but I was hoping. I'm sorry to bother you, but I'm at the end of my rope. I can't sleep, can't think straight, can't remember what it feels like to be at peace. Someone told me you might be able to help." Aisling set down her gardening tools and really looked at him, seeing not just his surface distress, but the profound longing beneath it, the soul-deep hunger for the very thing she had once sought so desperately herself. In that moment, she felt the presence of all her teachers and guides, Brigid with her infinite compassion, Cathbad with his deep wisdom, Fionn with his protective strength, the Sidhe with their restoration of joy, Diane Saked with her healing waters, Taliesin with his transformative stories, the Oak spirits with their grounding connection to the source of all life. "Come," she said simply, opening the gate and gesturing toward the garden where everything had begun. "Sit with me for a while. There's something I'd like to share with you, not advice or techniques, but something much more precious. I'd like to help you remember who you really are beneath all the weariness and struggle." As they settled onto the soft grass beneath the ancient apple tree, Aisling felt the profound satisfaction that comes from offering to another the very gift one has received. The circle was completing itself. The spiral of giving and receiving that was the true nature of healing, continuing its eternal dance. She had become not just a recipient of the ancient wisdom, but a keeper and sharer of it, a bridge between the sacred realms and the everyday world that so desperately needed their healing touch. The young man's story poured out of him in the way that stories do when they finally find a safe harbor, tales of pressure and expectation, of dreams deferred and energy depleted, of the gradual forgetting of what it meant to be truly alive. Aisling listened with the same quality of presence that Brigid had shown her, creating a space where transformation could begin to unfold naturally. As the afternoon light began to deepen toward evening, she saw the same miracle she had witnessed countless times in the year since her return. The moment when someone remembered they were not broken and needing to be fixed, but whole, and simply needing to be reminded of their wholeness. The young man's face began to soften. His breathing grew deeper and more natural. And when he looked up at her, his eyes held the first glimmer of the peace he thought he had lost forever. "I don't understand what's happening," he said, wonder creeping into his voice. "But I feel different, lighter, like I've been carrying something heavy and just remembered I could put it down." "That's exactly what you've done," Aisling replied, feeling the presence of her guides and teachers flowing through her words. "You've remembered that peace is not something you have to earn or achieve, but something you already are. Everything else is just forgetting, and forgetting can always be undone by remembering." As the sun set over the peaceful countryside, painting the sky in the sacred colors she had come to recognize as the signature of the realm where healing lived, Aisling understood that her journey was complete and yet eternal. She had found what she had been seeking. But more than that, she had become a fountain from which others could drink, a doorway through which the lost could find their way home to themselves. The Celtic twilight gathered around them like a blessing made visible. And in its embrace, the young man began his own journey toward the sacred places that existed both within and beyond the boundaries of ordinary reality. And Aisling, sitting in the garden where everything had begun, felt the profound peace that comes from knowing oneself to be exactly where one belongs, doing exactly what one was born to do, serving the great work of healing that was always calling new souls home to themselves. Epilogue, the eternal return. Years flowed by like the gentle streams that had sung her to sleep in the sacred realms, each one bringing new pilgrims to Aisling's garden, new souls ready to remember their own wholeness, new stories to be woven into the great tapestry of healing that spread outward from this peaceful place in ever-widening circles. The garden itself had become a sanctuary recognized not through any official designation, but through the simple word-of-mouth testimony of those whose lives had been transformed by what they found there. Aisling had long since given up any other occupation, not through dramatic decision, but through the natural evolution that occurs when one's true calling finally reveals itself. The work of holding space for others' healing had become as natural to her as breathing, supported not by conventional income, but by the generous gifts of those who recognized the value of what they had received and wanted to ensure it remained available for others. The cottage that had belonged to her grandmother now belonged to her. But in truth, it belonged to anyone who needed it, a resting place for weary souls, a sanctuary for those seeking the peace that their hearts remembered, but their minds had forgotten how to access. The garden had expanded over the years, not through her own planting, but through the mysterious way that healing places seem to call forth exactly what is needed. Herbs appeared that she had never planted. Flowers bloomed that seemed to carry medicine in their very fragrance. Trees grew with unusual speed and vigor, as if eager to provide shelter for the sacred work that unfolded beneath their branches. On this particular evening, as autumn was giving way to winter, and the first stars were appearing in the darkening sky, Aisling sat in the garden with a group of 12 people who had come from various distances and life circumstances, all drawn by the same hunger that had once driven her to seek the path between the standing stones. As had become her custom, she was sharing with them not instructions or techniques, but stories, tales that seemed to arise spontaneously from the intersection of ancient wisdom and contemporary need. Tonight's story was about a garden much like the one they sat in, where a woman much like herself had once discovered that what she thought was the end of her journey was actually its beginning. She spoke of sacred places that existed both in the mystical realms and in the depths of human consciousness, of teachers who appeared in forms both magical and mundane, of the healing that came not through effort, but through surrender to the intelligence that was always seeking to restore wholeness wherever it found receptivity. As she spoke, she could see the familiar transformation beginning to occur in her listeners. The softening of faces that had grown hard with struggle. The deepening of breath that had become shallow with anxiety. The brightening of eyes that had grown dim with the forgetting of their own inner light. This was the miracle she witnessed over and over again. The remembering that occurred when souls encountered the space and permission to rediscover their true nature. The most beautiful thing about this journey, she said, her voice carrying the same musical cadences that Taliesin had taught her, is that it never really ends. Each time we think we found what we were seeking, we discover that what we found is not a destination, but a doorway. Not an answer, but a deeper question. Not a conclusion, but a beginning. A woman in the circle, her face still marked by the stress she had carried to this place, but already showing signs of the transformation that was beginning within her, raised her hand tentatively. But how do we maintain this feeling when we go back to our regular lives? How do we keep from losing what we found here? Aisling smiled, recognizing the question she had once asked herself, remembering the fear that the peace she had discovered might be only temporary, only possible in special places and circumstances. The secret, she said, is understanding that you're not taking something with you from here back to your regular life. You're discovering that what you think of as your regular life has been the sacred realm all along. The peace you feel here isn't separate from you, it is you. The wisdom you're discovering isn't being given to you from outside, it's being remembered from within. As the evening deepened and the group settled into the profound silence that naturally arose when souls remembered their connection to the source of all peace, Aisling felt the presence of all her teachers and guides as strongly as she had on that first night in Brigid's roundhouse. They were not separate beings from distant realms, but aspects of the awakened consciousness that was available to anyone who created the space for it to emerge. She could feel Brigid's warmth in the way she naturally created safety for others to drop their defenses. Cathbad's wisdom flowed through her ability to help people remember what they had always known, but had forgotten how to access. Fionn's strength manifested in her capacity to remain centered and peaceful regardless of the intensity of pain or confusion that others brought to the circle. The joy of the Sidhe sparkled in her delight at witnessing each person's unique way of rediscovering their capacity for wonder. Diane Sake's healing flowed through her recognition that wholeness was not something to be achieved, but something to be uncovered beneath the layers of accumulated woundedness. Taliesin's gift for weaving transformative stories lived in her ability to speak the exact words that each soul needed to hear to remember its own truth. And the deep grounding of the oak spirits manifested in her unshakable knowing that this work was not dependent on her personal efforts, but was flowing through her from sources as vast and reliable as the root systems that connected every forest on Earth. As the group prepared to leave, exchanging quiet words of gratitude and making plans to return, Aisling remained in the garden, drawn as she often was to these moments of solitude when the sacred work had been completed and the space was returning to its natural state of pure potential. In these times, she could feel most clearly the presence of the eternal mystery that moved through all things, expressing itself as much through periods of rest as through periods of activity. The stars were fully visible now, their light reflected in the small pond that had formed naturally in the garden's center. A pond that reminded her daily of the sacred lake where she had found healing, of the 7 wells that bubbled up from sources deeper than thought. She often came here when sleep eluded her, not from anxiety or restlessness, but from the simple joy of being awake in a world so beautiful that rest itself became a form of celebration. Tonight, as she settled beside the pond's edge, she felt a familiar stirring in the air that told her she was not alone. The presence that had guided her from the very beginning of her journey, the nameless awareness that had first whispered to her heart that there was another way to live, was with her now as it had always been, as it always would be. "You have done well, daughter of 2 worlds," a voice spoke that was not heard with her ears, but felt in the very center of her being. "You have remembered the ancient compact between human consciousness and the sacred, and you have honored it by creating doorways for others to find their own way home. But tell me, what have you learned about the nature of the journey itself?" The question hung in the star-filled air like an invitation to the deepest contemplation. Aisling considered all that had unfolded since that first desperate evening when she had sought nothing more than a good night's sleep and had found instead a complete transformation of her understanding of what it meant to be alive. "I have learned," she said finally, her words addressed as much to the stars above as to the presence she felt beside her, "that the journey never begins where we think it does, and never ends where we expect it to. I thought I was seeking rest, but I was actually seeking remembrance. I thought I was looking for healing, but I was actually looking for wholeness. I thought I was trying to escape from my life, but I was actually trying to find my way deeper into it." The presence seemed to smile, though no form was visible in the darkness. "And what else? I have learned that every soul who seeks is actually being sought. That every question we ask is actually a question being asked through us by the intelligence that moves through all things. The teachers I met on my journey were not separate from me. They were aspects of my own consciousness that were ready to awaken. The healing I received was not given to me from outside. It was remembered from within. And the gift you now share with others is simply the reminder that they already possess everything they are seeking. My role is not to give them anything new, but to create the conditions where they can remember what they have never actually lost. The sacred realms are not distant places, but present realities. The healing they seek is not a future possibility, but a current truth. The peace they long for is not something they might eventually achieve, but something they already are. A profound silence settled over the garden, pregnant with the kind of meaning that could only be communicated without words. In this silence, Aisling felt herself expanding until her awareness encompassed not just the garden and its visitors, but the entire web of souls who were awakening to their true nature. The vast network of consciousness that was gradually remembering itself across the planet. She could sense others like herself in gardens and healing centers, in forests and by rivers, in cities and small towns. Ordinary people who had undergone extraordinary transformations and were now serving as bridges between the world of forgetting and the world of remembrance, each one unique in their expression, but united in their function. Each one a node in the great web of awakening that was spreading across the earth like light at dawn. This is how the ancient wisdom returns, the presence whispered, its voice now seeming to come from everywhere at once, from the stars and the pond, from the flowers and the ancient trees, from the very earth beneath her feet, not through dramatic revelations or spectacular events, but through souls like yours who have remembered who they are and cannot help but share that remembrance with others. Drop by drop, heart by heart, the sacred water returns to the wells that have run dry. As the night deepened around her, Aisling felt herself settling into the same quality of peaceful rest that had eluded her for so long before her journey began. But now she understood that rest was not the absence of activity, but the presence of perfect alignment with the flow of life itself. Rest was not something she achieved, but something she was, not a state she entered, but her natural condition when all striving ceased, and she simply allowed herself to be held by the love that sustained all existence, the last thing she was aware of before drifting into the deep, restorative sleep that had become her nightly blessing was the sound of water flowing, not from any physical source, but from the eternal spring that bubbled up at the center of consciousness itself, the source that was always available to anyone who remembered how to listen for its song. In her dreams that night, she walked again through all the sacred places of her journey. But now, she was not the lost and weary seeker she had once been. She was the Hearthkeeper and the Druid, the warrior and the she-woman, the healer and the storyteller, the the ancient oak and the spring water itself. She was every aspect of the awakened consciousness that had guided her transformation. And she was also herself, Aisling the gardener, Aisling the teacher, Aisling the bridge between worlds. And in the deepest part of the dream, she found herself sitting once again by Bridget's eternal fire, sharing stories with other souls who had made the journey from seeking to finding, from woundedness to wholeness, from forgetting to remembrance. The circle around the fire stretched on infinitely, including every being who had ever sought truth, ever longed for peace, ever remembered their divine nature. "Welcome home," Bridget said, her voice carrying all the warmth that had first greeted Aisling on that transformative night so long ago. "Welcome home to the place you never actually left, to the self you never actually lost, to the love that has been seeking you as surely as you have been seeking it." The fire crackled with the colors of every sunset and every dawn, and in its dancing flames, Aisling could see the faces of all the souls who would yet find their way to her garden, to other gardens like it, to the countless doorways that were opening everywhere as consciousness remembered its own nature. The work would continue, the circle would expand, the ancient wisdom would return, not through effort or struggle, but through the simple, natural unfolding that occurred whenever souls created space for truth to emerge. And in this vision of infinite possibility, of endless healing and awakening, Aisling found the deepest rest of all the rest that comes from knowing that love is working through everything, that consciousness is awakening everywhere, that the sacred has never actually been absent, but has simply been waiting for the right conditions to reveal itself once more. The fire burned on through the night of dreams, through the day of waking service, through all the seasons of giving and receiving that would follow. It burned in her garden and in her heart, in the hearts of all who found healing there, and in the hearts of all who would yet discover their own doorways to the sacred realms. For this was the greatest secret she had learned in all her journeying through the mystical landscapes of Celtic wisdom, that the sacred realms were not places one visited, but states of being one remembered, not destinations one reached, but qualities of awareness one embodied, not experiences one had, but truths one became. The eternal fire burned on, calling all souls home to themselves, offering rest to all who had forgotten how to rest, healing to all who had forgotten their wholeness, love to all who had forgotten they were love itself, wearing the temporary costume of human form. And in gardens and groves around the world, by firesides and healing wells, in circles of story and communion, the ancient compact between human and divine consciousness continued to renew itself, drop by drop, heart by heart, soul by soul, until the earth itself remembered its original nature as a sacred realm, where every being could find the peace and wholeness that was their eternal birthright. The dreaming waters flowed on, carrying their healing wherever consciousness was ready to receive it, wherever hearts had opened to remember their true nature, wherever souls had finally found their way home to the love that had never actually let them go. In the end, as in the beginning, there is only this: the eternal invitation to rest in the love that you are, to drink from the wells of wisdom that bubble up within your own consciousness, to walk the sacred paths that exist wherever awakened awareness meets the world with compassion and presence. May you find your own doorway between the standing stones. May you remember your own wholeness in the healing waters. May you carry the eternal fire of peace wherever your journey leads you. And may you always know yourself to be exactly where you belong, exactly who you were meant to be, exactly at home in the vast, loving mystery of existence itself. Sith peace.